Are you aspiring to ace the UPSC CSE? Commence your transformational journey with the Vision IAS Delhi GS Foundation Course 2025. Empower your exam preparation through cutting-edge educational technology and personalized learning experiences with tech-enabled learning. Dive into concepts with animations, videos, and interactive tools designed for maximum understanding and retention. Personalized student portal. Access live classes, recorded sessions, and extensive academic resources, all at your fingertips, anytime, anywhere. Enroll now and step closer to accomplishing your IAS dream. With the Vision IAS Delhi GS Foundation Course 2025, batches starting from 31st August, 5 p.m., 17th September, 9 a.m., 24th September, 1 p.m., 30th September, 5 p.m. Completing the syllabus without proper knowledge of current affairs will not take you far in the UPSC Civil Services examination. Regulate and transform your preparation with complete coverage of news of relevance. Get a concrete hold of current affairs for UPSC CSE with Vision IAS Monthly Current Affairs Revision Program starting from 20th September at 5 p.m. The program is your guide to get comprehensive news on one platform sourced through relevant resources such as The Hindu, Indian Express, Economic Times, PIB, Yojana, and others. Enroll for complete coverage of current affairs including Indian polity and constitution, economy, international relations, and more. Comprehensive assessment of preparation through MCQs and mains-oriented questions. Expert support through personalized mentoring and online doubt resolution.
All right, good evening everyone. Okay, this is our session on logical reasoning. Generally speaking, I would need to ask of you how many of you had any experience with civil services aptitude test previously? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. There will be a few pointers which you are going to cover, starting from what is the nature of the exam, followed by the sections, then strategy, then specifically about logical reasoning, and finally I will let the floor open to you if you have to ask any questions. The first section that we have to deal with is the nature of this exam. Now if you look at the nature of this exam, right, civil services aptitude test is one that of qualifying nature. When I say qualifying nature, what does it mean? It means that you have to qualify it, nothing else, right? Now this aspect has changed it's about a decade now, right, since this exam has been made qualifying. Previous to when it was qualifying, there were 80 odd questions. Each question was worth 2.5 marks. Now negative marking would have been minus 1/3. And back in the day, it used to be accounted for, which is to say there were 2 papers every time you would take General Studies ka prelims test, GS1, and then followed by CSAT. Your cumulative score was looked at before deciding whether you are making to prelims or not. Now it's been about 10 odd years since they have made CSAT qualifying. they have given to you a pre-decided cutoff. The pre-decided cutoff would be that you have to get 1/3 of the total score. Now, if you multiply 80 by 2.5, the total score will be 200. So you have to score roughly around 1/3 of 200, which is going to be roughly 67. In terms of questions, this would mean that you have to get 1/3 of the total number of questions right. Now, since the total number of questions itself is 80 odd, that means you have to get somewhere around 27 questions right. If you manage to get 27 questions right and 0 questions wrong, that is when you're about to clear this exam. First thing I have to highlight is that it is qualifying. When I say qualifying, it does not mean that if you do not qualify this exam, your other paper will not be evaluated or you will not get those marks. You will. It's just that those will not be accounted for. Which is to say, if you are scoring anywhere less than 67, you may have scored 160 in General Studies 1, does not matter. You will still not be through. You have to make sure that you qualify this exam by scoring 67 and above. For you to get 67, you have to get 1/3 of the questions right without getting any question wrong. Because the moment you get a question wrong, there will be negative marking. That is the first thing you have to understand. The second thing is about the number of sections. Now, in this exam, Civil Services Aptitude Test, how many sections are there in total? Broadly, in any aptitude test, you will have the following sections. You will have sections with respect to quantitative aptitude. You will have a section which is LRDI. And the third section normally is what is called verbal ability. Any aptitude test is going to have these 3 sections. Is CSAT any different? Not really. In CSAT, minor changes. There would be quantitative aptitude for sure. There is between LR and DI, there is predominantly LR only, followed by verbal ability, and verbal ability is checked only and only through reading comprehensions. No other questions on verbal ability. Right? So predominantly there are 3 sections: QA, LR, and reading comprehensions. Next thing is, for you to know how to qualify this exam, right, you have to know what is the weightage assigned. Right? Each of these sections, if you look at the evolution of the exam, ever since it has been made qualifying, which is roughly around the time, if I'm not mistaken, 2014-15, previous to 2014-15, there was a certain weightage assigned, right? Since 2014-15, the weightage has completely changed now. Previous to 2014-15, you had roughly around 40 questions you could have expected from RCs. Back in the day, there were also questions which were called questions based on decision making. Now, decision-making questions would be far and few between. Back in the day, there would be 4 to 5 odd questions on decision-making. The only difference being, in decision-making, there can be multiple right answers, right? And then remaining were RCs, 40 odd RCs. This would vary between 35 to 40, sometimes even 42, right? The remaining questions were both quantitative aptitude and LR combined, which is to say 40 questions were LR plus QA, quantitative aptitude. Now, since this exam has been made qualifying, they made it qualifying across 2 phases. In the first time, they said questions based on English will not be evaluated. Next time, they made it completely qualifying. Since they have made it qualifying, the nature and the weightage has changed. What is the weightage now? Now, there are 3 sections. In reading comprehensions, typically, you will find 18 passages. Out of these, 9 passages will have 2 questions. 9 passages will have 1 question, right? Which is to say, how many in total? You will find roughly 27 questions. In addition, there will be 2 other sections. One is logical reasoning. The other one is quantitative aptitude. That means if 27 questions come from one section alone, the remaining 53 questions have to come from these 2 combined. Now, LR, you can expect somewhere between 14 to 18 odd questions, right? Somewhere between 14 to 18. That would mean the remaining questions will be quantitative aptitude. This would be roughly around 35 to 39 odd questions, right? This is the new weightage. If you look at the weightage, there are 3 sections. RC has 27, LR has somewhere around 14 to 18 odd. There were years when they have asked you 20 questions also in LR. There were years when they have asked you 14 questions in LR. Right? Normally, quantitative aptitude will lie somewhere between 35 to 40 odd questions. That means if you look at the weightage, this weightage tries to put certain people into delusion. Right? What kind of people? Those people who think that they can get away with verbal ability. Those people who think their English is strong enough. We have done reading comprehensions in the past. Right? If we only rely and solely rely on reading comprehensions, we would be through. Right? Are they absolutely right? Now, theoretically speaking, you can get all 27 questions right in reading comprehensions and you will be through. Theoretically, it's quite possible. Only those people would completely rely on RCs, right, who have never seen CSAT ke RCs in the previous cases. If you have seen RCs in CSAT, specifically since it has been made qualifying, you would know that RC for CSAT is very, very different from any other RCs. Reason being, there are other exams too. For example, there would be a GMAT, there is a CAT, there is IBPS, there are other banking exams, there is SSC. In all those tests, if you have a reading comprehension, that reading comprehension primarily tests the following thing. First, can you understand complicated writing or not? And what makes that writing complicated is vocabulary, which is to say number of words. Right? You may have certain words which you are not aware of. Right? Sometimes when you are thrown those words, can you understand them or not? That is something which is tested. The other thing which is tested is, by and large, the structure of the passage. Because it is the structure of the passage which basically builds their main argument. They may ask you to find what is the main argument in the passage, what are the supporting arguments in the passage. Right? Pretty much this. Then there are questions which are inference-based questions. There are questions which may ask you to find corollaries, something like that. But by and large, what is tested in reading comprehension in any aptitude test would be whether you understand the language or not. Right? Which is to say, there may be passages coming in from multiple sections. They may ask you a passage which is related to space sciences. There may be a passage, let's say, on biotechnology. There may be a passage on, think about it, sports. There may be a passage on politics. There may be a passage on political philosophy, on climate change. Right? You are not an expert on each of these domains. Right? Some of you do not even have any science background at all. Right? You may be thrown those passages. It is not that you have to understand the science behind it. It is only that you have to understand the language behind it. If you can pick on that language, you will be able to solve those questions. In reading comprehensions for CSAT, the one thing which is fundamentally tested is the understanding of the passage, which is to say, normally speaking, passages will be really tiny. You will find passages which may be probably about 3 sentences, sometimes even 4 sentences. At best, you may find it's not like they have never asked you longer passages too. They have asked you longer passages which will have probably 2 paras. But right now, the trend has been the passages will be really small. Right? These passages could be 4 lines, 5 lines, sometimes they could be 10 odd lines, not more than that. Right? These tiny passages will not have complicated writing also. Which is say across 19 odd passages, you may find 1 or 2 odd passages where there may be one or the other odd word that you have never heard before. Right? So it's not really about writing. It is about understanding the substance. Which is to say, what is being written about in the text. Right? You may have a text on political philosophy. The text would be written in the simplest English possible, but you will have to understand the content there. Not really only the language. Right? So, ये नहीं कि सिर्फ आपने sentences पकड़ लिए and then you are good to go. No. You have to understand the underlying substance, which is to say, it helps you if you are good with general studies in any case. If you have to say, if you are good with polity, you will be picking up on some on political philosophy. If you are good in one of your optionals, could be sociology, it could be political science, it could be a pub ad, it could be economics. If you are good in those optionals, chances are that you will be able to read between the lines also as to what is the broader idea, right? What could the author be trying to imply? You will have to pick on the underlying substance, which is something not generally expected from you if you are attempting any other aptitude test, right? Passages will be really, really small. It's not going to take you a lot of time to read those passages. 4 to 5 lines, sometimes 10 odd lines, not a lot of time. It is in the options that you will get stuck. You will have 4 options, and whenever we conduct these classes, and all of my students would have known, right? If I ask of them how many think A is the answer, there will be some hands raised. How many think B is the answer, there will still be some hands raised. C, D, for every option, you will find there are hands which are raised, right? Which is to say, everybody is confused between options, and it is going to take you the most amount of time to skim through these options, right? So RCs, if you want to rely completely on RCs, I would say it's a fatalistic strategy to have, right? Because there are just about enough questions in RCs. Chances are they may ask you 26 questions. Then what will you do with the 27th one? Chances are they may ask you 28 questions, but out of these 28 questions, the options will be so closely spaced that one, you will waste a lot of time attempting these, and then you will still not be sure. You come back, there are multiple institutions coming out with their own keys. You will find that typically 4 to 5 questions are questions which are in doubt. There will be people who are saying A is the answer, there will be people who are saying C is the answer. You will not be sure. And if you're not sure, if your strategy was only to attempt RCs, you're not sure whether all of your RCs are correct or not, chances are that you're going to carry that stress in the coming weeks till your results are out. Right now, when your results are out, you could be lucky, you could have survived it. Chances are that you're not lucky. That may also happen, right? Now, RCs, in any case, you should not rely specifically on one section. You should at least be good at 2 sections, right, when you're attempting any civil services aptitude test. RCs, like I said, not about language so much, but about understanding the substance behind it, right? However good you are with general studies, it's always going to help you, right, skim through these options, pick out which option is right, which option is wrong. And the other 2 are logical reasoning and quantitative aptitude. If you look at the evolution of civil services aptitude test, they have made civil services aptitude test a little harder now, right? Now, when I say this aptitude test was harder, usually it is quantitative aptitude which is harder. In fact, in the history of civil service aptitude test, between QA and LR, the easier section is LR. It's quantitative aptitude, which basically is the cause of worry for most candidates. It's not LR. If you look at any other exam, for example, if you pick a CAT, in CAT, LRDI would be the most hardest. It will be the hardest exam, right, out of the 3 sections. In civil service aptitude test, that's not the case. Usually the hardest section is QA, right? Now, for you to generally outline a strategy broadly, you should definitely pick on at least 2 out of these 3. Now, you could be somebody who goes for an RC-LR combined. You could be somebody who goes for an RC-QA combined. You could be somebody who goes for a QA-LR combined. Right? Depends upon what your areas of strength are. Now, you have seen the marks distribution. The least distribution, least weight assigned is to LR, right? Followed by RCs, followed by QA. QA has the maximum number of questions. This is the general weightage, right? This weightage is important for you to understand. It's not that UPSC is bound by law that they're going to only ask you 27 questions in RCs and they're going to ask you 15 questions in LR. They may change it tomorrow. But the trend has broadly been like this. So you can formulate your strategy around what the trend has been like, right? Did you understand this? All right. First was the qualifying nature. Second is the number of sections. Third was the weightage assigned per section and changes in weightage over time, followed by the level of difficulty of each section. Like I said, in terms of both of in all the 3 sections, usually it is quants, which is the biggest cause of worry for most people, followed by LR. Most people do not prepare for RCs, while if you ask me, RCs, at least in this year's question paper, RC would have been possibly the toughest, right? Out of the 3 sections. I'm not saying it's the toughest since CSAT was ever, started. No. RC this year would have been pretty much the toughest section, right? Now, the third thing is about formulating a strategy, right? This is for kids in my class. I've told them multiple times, one of the major reasons as to why people are going to fail CSAT would be because they do not know how to navigate this exam when it is the D-Day. When you go to the center, right, how is it that people who have an engineering background, how is it that people who are normally good with quants, normally good with LR, they also fail CSAT? What is the reason? The biggest reason is not knowing how to navigate this exam, which is to say, on your main exam day, whenever you're attempting this exam, that day you will have General Studies 1 in the morning, followed by CSAT in the afternoon. There is usually a 2 to 3 hour break, if I'm not mistaken, probably it's about a 2 hour break in the middle, right, between GS1 and CSAT. Now, everybody knows that your chances of whether you are going to make it to the list or not basically depends on GS1. It is only qualifying. So all those people are going to take GS1 in the morning. The moment they are out of the center, you will find yourself submerged within some 20 odd keys. Every institute is rushing to bring out their keys, right? 5-10 minutes you will find 2 keys, 3 keys, 4 keys necessarily. And everybody has this fear of missing out. They want to see how many of these questions did they get right and did they get wrong, right? What they would do is, they would look at these keys, right? In any exam, you have to understand, if the cutoff is 85, 90 odd, sometimes the cutoff is 100 odd, which is say 50 odd %, chances are that you would have done a few questions wrong, right? You check 10 odd questions. In some cases, some students may have like maybe 1 or 2 wrong. Some students may have 4 to 5 wrong. Some students may even have 7 to 8 wrong, right? Now, those students who have gotten a few more questions wrong in the first 10, they start stressing, right? The moment they start stressing, the only thing occupying their head would be General Studies 1, right? Now, in the next 2 hours, they're possibly fighting other answers for those questions, right? कि ये की ही गलत होगी हो सकता है because अभी जल्दी से बना के रखी हुई है, it most likely is wrong, so I'm going to Google it up कि मेरा answer सही है, right? In these 2 hours, you're not going to give yourself adequate rest. You're only going to be bothered by GS1. Now it's your time to appear for Civil Services Aptitude Test. Especially for those kids who have never trained themselves, what will they do? They'll get this question paper. They will start from question number 1 and go in a sequence till question number 80 odd. Now there are 4 sets, A, B, C, and D, right? 4 sets have different distributions of questions, right? If your set is 1, where the first few questions, let's say, are from sections like probability, from sections like number systems, from sections like permutations and combinations, or from one of those LR sections that you're dreading, right? If the first few questions are those, you will try to solve them. If you get them wrong, you're already stressed, right? And if you get these questions wrong, then it will lead to a lot of lack of confidence. If you're carrying very little confidence, I can guarantee you from experience that do not think about QA and LR then. Both of these sections require enormous confidence before you pick up on a specific question, right? So they waste themselves completely not knowing how to navigate it. What you should do in any exam is the following 5 things. You have to first look at the question paper. First thing you have to do is to identify. What do you identify? You identify questions based on different sections. You will have questions based on, just a moment, you will have questions based on, let's say, QA, identify quantitative aptitude, identify logical reasoning, and identify RCs. You don't really have to identify RCs. They're right in front of you. There are passages you can see, right? But between QA and LR questions, you should know which is a quantitative aptitude question, which one is an LR question. Now, depending upon which section you are good at, you start with the section that you are particularly good at, right? You do not start randomly. You do not start from question number 1 to question number 80. You first segregate, which is to say, firstly, identify these questions, mark them. Usually what I would do is, LR ke liye I would have a circle. For QA, I would have a circle and a cross, or maybe just a cross, so that I know this is a QA question, this one is an LR question. Third thing is to divide. What do you divide? You divide the time, which is to say, there are a total of 120 minutes. Now in 120 minutes, you have to do 80 odd questions with different weightages. You have roughly around 27 questions from RCs, roughly around 15 odd questions from LR, and roughly around 38 questions on QA. Let's say this is your distribution, right? Now you have to divide the time, right? Which section should you attempt first? Which section should you not? Now, normally speaking, ideally speaking, what I say is, you do RCs in the second half, which is the later half of the question paper, right? The first half should be dedicated to both of them. First half, for some people, it could be 60 minutes. For some people, it could be 50 minutes. For some people who are not very fond of RCs in general, not very confident in verbal ability, but their QA and LR is pretty sharp, for them, it could even be 1 hour 15, 1 hour 20 minutes, right? Depending upon what your prowess is, you divide the time. If you have to normally, you should always pick QA and LR first. The reason why you should pick QA and LR first is, somebody who is going to pick up an RC first is some person who is pretty much confident in reading comprehensions, pretty much confident in his verbal ability. Like I said, the passages will be really tiny, right? It's not like you're going to waste a lot of time reading these passages. The problem is with picking the options in these questions. That is going to take the most amount of time. And like I said, reading comprehensions in civil service aptitude test have so closely spaced options that you would want to read these options over and over again. You would possibly want to find a main argument, a supporting argument in your passage, reread your passage, just to be sure that whatever you're marking is right. Right? Now that leads to a lot of time wastage. Right? You can normally imagine any person who's going to start with an RC first. जो पहले RC से start करेगा, most likely he's that person or she's that person who thinks RC से ही उसका clear हो जाने वाला है. Right? She or he is solely reliant on RCs, and RCs are very, very closely spaced, right? Chances are that you may end up wasting a lot of time. What you thought you could be doing in 50 minutes, you may end up spending 1 hour 20 minutes on that specific section. Now, if you have spent more than what is the required time, that will leave you with far lesser time to do two big sections. One is QA and the other one is LR. Right? This is why I normally recommend that people should start with QA and LR first in the first half. For some people, this first half, like I said, could be 40 minutes, depending upon how strong you are with QA and LR. For some people, it could be 50. For some people, it could be 55. For some people, 1 hour. For some people, 1 hour 15 minutes, depending upon who you really are, what your areas of strength are. The second half should be dedicated to RCs. Now, last year, there was a specific student. I had recommended the exact same strategy to him. For him, it was a bit of a challenge, right? To be able to, manage to do 20 odd questions right in, let's say, the first half. Right? His RC was pretty strong. Probably he took about 4 to 5 odd tests. He came back to me and he said, for me, what works is I'm going to take RCs in the first half. I'm going to do it in a time-bound manner, and then I'm going to do the QA and LR part. Usually, he was somebody who was very confident with his verbal ability. Right? He said, I don't take more than what is the required time. Right? When I'm confident that I've probably gotten some 20, 25 odd questions in RCs right, then that confidence I carry to QA and LR, and I manage to do more questions than I normally do. This is something that you discover for yourself. When I make a message, when I am giving a message that you should ideally do QA and LR first and RCs second, this is a message for most students. For most students, it's going to work. Right? Chances are that you may not be one of those students. Right? You will take a few more tests and decide for yourself what works for you. Whether you want to take an RC first or a QA-LR first. Ideally speaking, you should do a QA and LR first. It really does not matter. The reason I told you, why RC later. RC is later, why? Because 28 odd questions, 18 odd passages, tiny passages, it's not going to take a lot of time for you to read them. And when you know for a fact there is only 50 minutes remaining in this exam, you're not going to be wasting a lot of time rereading those passages. You'll go with whatever your gut instinct is. Right? Normally, that is the logic. If you want to be a different person, you pretty much can be a different person. Now, if you have picked up QA and LR in the first half, QA and LR combined is roughly around 53 odd questions. Right? Out of these 53, I can guarantee you that roughly around 30 questions will be very, very doable. These are very doable questions. Right? You may find some 20 odd questions which are particularly challenging. But 30 questions will be much more than doable. You only have to identify these doable questions, which is to say, you should be trained so much that you look at a question and you know, can you solve it or not. You should look at a question, you should know this is going to take a lot of time. You should be looking at a question which you should know कि 5 seconds में 10 seconds में भी हो जाएगा. Some questions you would automatically know कि it may take you probably about 4 to 5 odd minutes. Right? You should know that aspect about yourself. Right? What you want to do is at least try to get the cutoff in the first half itself. Which is say out of these 53 questions, try to get 27 questions right here itself. Right? Try to get those right. The only thing you have to do is identify the questions which are doable. If you manage to get 27 questions right here itself, in the next half, you can easily sail through your RCs. Now, RCs, regardless of how good or bad you are with RCs, you are always going to land yourself in some positive score for sure. Right? If you manage to get, let's say, 20 questions right in the first half, out of 53, I'm saying 20, and 20 is not a huge number. Out of 50 is roughly 1/3 of 53, right? If you get 20 questions right, that means you have gotten 50 marks already. In the next half, you only have to get 17, right? Through verbal ability, through RCs, which anybody can do, right? You most likely are going to make it. If you do this, right? You do that, then you attempt your first few sections. Finally, count the number of questions. Right, count the number of questions as you've been doing that. Right, if you are probably doing, let's say in the first half, you have done, let's say, probably 14 to 15 questions. You should not wake up after 1 hour and check, oh, is it 1 hour already? Have I done 14 questions in 1 hour? No. Right, you have to keep a track of time. In like 15 minutes, you have to check how many questions have you done in 15 minutes. Then you have to pick up on speed. Sometimes you may be stuck doing a question which is a little lengthy. Right, if you find yourself doing a question which is a little lengthy and you have, let's say, spent 5 odd minutes to do that particular question, next thing would be to identify another question which you know for a fact can be done in a speedy manner. Right? Try to keep a track of time, let's say every 15 odd minutes in the first half. Right? 15 minute ka ek apna interval leke, that will be your pit stop. After every 15 minutes, check how many questions you have done. Try to get 20 questions right in the first half, then move to passages in the second one. Normally, this should be how you navigate. And in the last cases, like I said, count. If you are able to get some 20 questions right already, right, don't get a little too greedy. Depending upon who you really are, if you find yourself doing quants and LR better, you may pick on doing more questions on quant and LR. If you know that quants and LR is moderate for me, then you can move up straight to RCs. This normally is how you should be navigating. Most people fail because they're not navigating. They're going from question 1 to question 2, question 2 to question 3, right? Sometimes deciding to pick certain questions on their ego, right? Sometimes struggling with those questions, not keeping a track of time. Right? That may even happen. And if you manage to get a few 4 to 5 questions wrong in the first few instances, right, that is going to lead to a shaking of your confidence. Don't do that, right? Now, specifically about reading comprehension, about reasoning. Right, we are here only for reasoning. The topics in reasoning are these. These are your broader topics. Right? You have cubes, you have calendars, you have clocks, you have arrangements. There are questions on distribution. Arrangements and distribution are pretty much the same. There are questions on syllogism, blood relations, inequalities, dices, codes, series. This is not all there is to reasoning. It is not all that there is to reasoning. If you are probably, let's say, preparing for reasoning for a CAT, you will be required to pick on other topics too. You will be required to let go of some few and decide to pick on other first. For example, in CAT, there are questions on tournaments. In CAT, there are questions on networking and maps also. Right? There may be some more topics that you will be required to do in CAT, right? You don't get any questions on tournaments, you don't get any questions on networking and maps. Is it to say that they will never ask you a question on tournaments or they will never ask you a question on networking and maps? So far they have not, and we have had a 10-year history, more than 10-year history, so you can always go by the trend. Broadly, the topics covered are these. You have questions based on cubes, right? Questions based on cubes will be of a certain few types. I'm going to discuss broadly what kind of questions they normally ask you. Right? There are calendars, clocks, arrangements, distribution, syllogism, blood relations, inequalities, dices, codes, and series. These are the broader topics to be covered. Now, if you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 and 4 is 8, 8 plus 3 is 11. There are 11 odd topics. Out of these 11 odd topics, they're supposed to ask you some 14 to 18 questions. Chances are, from a singular topic, you may get 2, you may get 3 sometimes. The most commonly asked chapters would be calendars, multiple counts in a singular year. They have asked you 2 questions or 3 questions also. You may get 2 or 3 questions on clocks too. Sometimes you may get 2 or 3 questions on syllogism too. If you find an arrangement-based question, usually it will be one question which will have 2 sub-questions with it, and usually you will have one. Blood relations are questions that you may find multiple counts of. Right? Cubes are not typically questions that you will find multiple counts of, but they have done this also. You have to understand 14 to 18 odd questions to be asked in CSAT from broadly about 11 odd topics. Chances are one or the other odd topic may be asked multiple times in the same year. ये भी हो सकता है. Now, like I said, broadly, these are your topics. What I want you to be absolutely sure of is this part first, level of difficulty. Now, when you decide to prepare for reasoning, right, what is your expectation? What kind of questions should you be able to solve? There are a range of aptitude exams, a range of competitive exams, starting from SSE, which is the easiest, followed by IBPS, which is moderate in comparison with SSE, followed by GMAT. I would say it is on the easier side, but a lot of people find it hard because verbal ability in GMAT is the toughest, given the kind of vocabulary they ask. Then you have SBI PO and Allied, far harder compared to GMAT. I would keep it on the moderate side. The hardest would be CAT. Right? This would be the hardest of all aptitude tests that they ask in the country so far. Now, if you are going out to prepare for reasoning, what should your expectation be? Would you decide to pick on a book from CAT and would you want to do questions based on CAT straight up? No, that's not how you go about it. Here you have to understand the level of difficulty is always relative. It depends upon who you are, what your background has been like. Some people who have gone to premier engineering colleges, they're not going to look at a GMAT or an SBI PO or probably an IBPS, and they will not look at them and think these are difficult questions. They're not. For them, CAT would be moderate to difficult sometimes. But they understand how to navigate CAT too. For some person who's, let's say, who has an arts background, right, he may just pick a book on CAT and he will just scare himself. That can also happen. It really depends upon who you are, what your background has been like. For example, there are the following kinds of candidates. There are candidates who have a humanities background. Right? Candidates with a humanities background. You have candidates who have science background. There are candidates who are specifically engineers, or let's say maths, or let's say stats for that matter. Depending upon what your background is, there are candidates with humanities backgrounds, right? अब उसमें अब economics and commerce भी कई बारी आ जाती है, right? With some flair for economics, with some flair for mathematics. Then there are candidates who are probably, let's say, history, political science candidates, right? Candidates who are deeply humanities, right? Last, when they picked or saw a book on maths, possibly was standard 10th, right? You could be any of these. You could be some person who's involved with, hard sciences, which is to say, probably doing your BSc physics, BSc chemistry, BSc botany, zoology, right? Probably you will also be a candidate from medicine ka background, right? Not a lot of maths done. Then you will have candidates who come from engineering, maths or stats. Now this here also there is a gradation, people who went to premier colleges, people who just did engineering for the sake of it because their parents sent them, any reasons, right? You have to pick on which kind of a candidate you are. Depending on which kind of candidate you are, you will have to then set your expectations right. For some person who has had this background and let's say from one of the better colleges in the country, right, this person does not have to prepare specifically for CSAT. He only has to brush up his basics, probably 1 month before the exam. Some person who has had this background, but let's say not so premier or probably did engineering because somebody forced him to, right? That person may have to go back to basics once again. But both of these candidates definitely should work on their foundation. They definitely should work on their foundation, which is to say, high chances that these candidates last touched a maths book probably when they were 15 odd. Right now you're 21, 22, you have lost touch with maths for a long time now, right? You have to focus on your foundation. The reason why I'm telling you have to focus on your foundation is because the weightage has now changed, right? And the level of difficulty for quants has also improved. They have gradually and slowly raised the temperature. they're now going to expect you to know at least moderate level of difficulty questions. Therefore, you have to work on your foundations. It is very different from an SSC exam where you just memorize some tricks and you look at a question and you are able to solve them like in a blink of an eye. Not those questions. Basic questions requires some fundamentals, hence you have to build a certain foundation first. This foundation is going to help you both with quants and with LR or DI. Now, what is the difference between quants and LR? फर्क क्या दोनों में? Quants is predominantly maths, right? LR is you applying a sense of reason to reach a stage in the question where basic arithmetic or basic maths is going to see you through. Right? This is more about picking on clues in the question. It will not, probably there will be one or the other odd topic where you will have a formula. Across LR, you will not find formula being used. It is not maths. It is you applying a sense of reasoning, which is why in CAT, this is the hardest. Right? In CSAT, this is compared to quantitative aptitude easier. It depends on the kind of question they are asking you. Now, what makes LR hard in CAT? Right? If you are appearing for a CAT, what is it about LR that makes it harder? One, in any questions on LR, you have to have the ability to pick on clues given in the question. Right? In an easy question, the clues will be relatively straightforward. Right? Which is to say, sometimes these clues are given in the form of numbers, sometimes in the form of words, and all the clues are relevant. In a question which is harder, they will give you certain relevant clues, they will give you certain irrelevant clues. You have to train yourself in a manner that you can easily spot on which are the relevant cues to begin with. That is one. Then, not just a singular concept to be applied in questions which are harder, there are some layers involved. Right? You have to breeze through multiple layers to be able to solve a specific question. For example, a case in point, let's say if they have to ask you a question on tournaments, which normally does not happen in CSAT. There are tournaments of multiple types. There could be a tournament, let's say, of the knockout type. Do you know what a knockout is? A knockout is one team playing against the other, right? Loses, then is knocked out, wins, moves to the next stage. There are tournaments of the time round robin. What is round robin? The kind of T20 World Cup we had this year. Right? There are teams divided into multiple groups. For example, each group has, let's say, 4 teams. Or let's say each group has, let's say, 6 odd teams. Each team is going to play the remaining 3 teams, right? Depending upon the number of points accumulated, those who are, let's say, the top 2 or the top teams are going to move to the next stage, right? Now, 4 teams playing against the remaining 3 would mean each team gets to play 3 more teams. That means there are 12 such matches, but team A playing against team B is the same as team B playing against team A. So this will basically be 4 times 3 divided by 2. You will have 6 odd matches, right, in total. Then you have number of points, followed by the number of points, they're going to move to round 2, right? You may have a double round robin too, right? Double round robin would mean what? Would mean same thing, teams involved are split into groups. They have to play a home match, they also have to play an away match, right? Which is to say the number of matches is going to double for sure. In CAT, most questions you're going to find would be double round robin, which is to say they will add more and more layers to the question for them to make it a little more complicated for you, right? In a CSAT, they don't even ask you tournaments, right? They will not do that. When we have taken up a few classes, for example, there were questions on arrangements. Arrangements is you have to place a certain few elements along a certain shape. They will give you certain rules of placement. You will use those rules to place these elements along a certain shape. The shape could be a line. The shape could be a circle. The shape could be any quadrilateral. The shape could be any polygon. Multiple geometrical shapes, they will give you certain rules of placement of elements and you have to place these elements along a specific shape. Now, you may have to place not just these elements. Sometimes they may layer it up with one more property about these elements, which is to say, not only, let's say, there is a question on you placing books around a round table, right? Then they may give you another layer, which is that some of these books are binded and some of these books are not binded, right? You may be required to, let's say, place people around a circular table. Not only do you have to place these people, you also, let's say, have to place their places of origin or the city that they come from. They can add one layer, they can add multiple layers too, right? Now, depending upon the number of layers, the question is going to become more and more lengthy, sometimes more and more complicated. There are other questions too, which are what we call distribution questions. Distribution and arrangements are pretty much the same. In an arrangement, you have to place them around a certain geometrical shape. In a distribution question, you will basically have to go to a grid format, which is, say, for example, a schedule of sorts, right? Just say in Vision IAS, there are n number of teachers. N number of teachers teach these following subjects. Some subjects are held on a certain day of the time. Amongst these days, some days are holidays. Then you have to place them, right? There is no circular shape, there is no linear shape, there is no quadrilateral, there is no polygon. You'll have to think of a grid pattern first, right? Now, if you look at the kind of questions CSAT has asked you, arrangements, if you ask me personally speaking, in LRDI would be the hardest. They can make it as hard as possible, right? But in civil service aptitude test, they have never asked you a distribution-based question. Amongst arrangements too, they have not asked you complicated or layered questions. What they have basically asked you is usually the simplest of all kinds of arrangements, which are circular arrangements. Simplest of them all, right? This is the expectation that you have to carry, which is, say, if you want to clear CSAT, would you want to begin top down or would you want to begin bottoms up, right? Top down does not work for a quant and it does not work for an LR, specifically for those people who have had no background, right? Or who have had probably last touched a book on quants or reasoning in 10th standard. It is not going to work for you. You're not going to find the hardest questions and try to solve the hardest questions, then automatically assume that I can easily do the easy ones. No. You have to build your base. You have to start from the foundation. And layer by layer, you have to first solve easy questions, gain some confidence, repeat many easy questions so that it becomes muscle memory, then move on to more moderate level questions. Try to solve those moderate level questions, repeat them, that it becomes muscle memory. You don't even have to go to the harder questions because that is not the expectation that CSAT carries on you. That expectation may work for a CAT, not for a CSAT. You have to know this for sure, right? Multiple exams, like I said, level of difficulty is going to be very, very different and the kind of exam is also going to be very, very different. In my classes, I always tell that if your expectations have to be set right, there is CAT, there is, let's say, banking, and then there is bottom of the league, which is SSC, right? Banking, maybe there are layers. You have an SBI PO, then you have an IBPS. And SBI PO is harder than an IBPS, right? What should you be expecting or what should be your level expectations if you want to get CSAT right? CSAT at best is this level, which is, say, if there are 4 levels of difficulty, CSAT is second from the bottom, right? CAT would be the hardest. If you want to prepare for CSAT, you don't even have to bother much about CAT itself. It's a different exam. Each of these exams are different. The kind of questions are also different. The requirements are also very, very different. For instance, in a CAT, back in the day when I appeared for CAT, there were 3 sections. Then they made it 2 sections. I am told now there are 3 sections once again, which will say there are questions from QA, questions from LRDI, and then there are questions from verbal ability. In CAT, if you want to, let's say, get a 99 plus percentile, percentile, right? Do you have to do all 20 questions or all 30 questions per section? Let's say there are 30 questions per every section. Do you have to get 30 questions right to get a 100 percentile? No. Right? If you manage to get some 14, 15, 16 odd, you are above 95. in each section. And if you're 95 plus in each section, you are definitely 99.5 plus in your overall percentile. Right? That is a game mostly of picking questions. Which questions would you be picking? Because typically, sometimes there are 40 minutes given for each section. If it's a 2-hour exam, if it's a 3-hour exam, they give you 1 hour per every section. Right? In 1 hour sections, you have to do, let's say, 20 odd, sometimes 22 questions, sometimes 24, sometimes 30 odd. You don't have to do all 30. You have to have the ability to pick on some 14, 15 or half of those questions that you can get right in that limited time. Right? That is the expectation from you in a CAT. Very, very different exam. Very, very different kind of questions that they will ask you compared to any other aptitude test. In an SBIP or an IBPS, I've never taken them. I don't know. I've never taken an SSC. I don't know. But in SSC, at least I know what the sections are. In SSC, you will have, if I'm not mistaken, there is a current affairs guy question, and then there is aptitude test. Now, ideally speaking, some of you may have taken SSC who would know better, right? Usually there are some 2 hours, and then you have to do 100 questions. And if you're not able to solve 95 plus, you're not going to get through. 120 minutes for 100 questions, right? If you're not able to get, let's say, 95 odd, you're not going to get into your top ranks, whatever you want to get. That means this is a game of speed. CAT is a game of picking questions rather than speed. Some speed also, but picking questions first. You do not want to be struggling with a question that you know is going to take more time. You should be able to identify which questions can be done with speed and then do it with speed. This is purely a game of speed. Right? Hence, if you look at any videos on SSC, you will find there are people who know about tricks. There will be every question, permutations of questions. There will be some 20 tricks that you have to remember for every section, because their selection hinges on how fast they are. How speedily can they do these questions? Most of the best candidates in SSC would have memorized these tricks. They would have seen so many questions that they would by memory know what the answer is. It's a different exam. CSAT, you have to remember, 120 minutes granted to you in CSAT. 120 minutes. And practically speaking, you have to get only 27 questions right without getting any question wrong. 120 minutes for not even 30 questions, which means more than 4 minutes for every question if you manage to find 27 that you can get right. That means it's not a game of speed. It could be for some people a game of identification of questions, right? You have to set your expectations right first, right? The kind of questions that they have asked you would be, like I said, the level of difficulty of an IBPS, which I would rate easy. Most people would rate it moderate, but it's definitely not hard at all. If you practice enough, you will be very, very good at these questions, not a problem. This is the expectation that you have to set for yourself. Anybody? Now, with the right expectation, then you have to talk about each of these sections. Right? I can broadly tell you which of those sections are normally considered easy. Amongst these 11 odd sections, calendars is usually easier because you can practice and get so much better at calendars. 90% of clocks-based questions are easy. Some 10%, a specific type of clock-based question may not be easy for most people. Syllogism, if you get a hang of how to solve these questions, would be easy. Blood relations, dices are extremely, extremely easy. Series and quotes is basically about how many questions have you seen in your life. It's about pattern finding. Right? The more questions you have done in your life, you will be a little faster at picking up certain patterns. But series and codes sometimes could be, you can pick on a pattern in 10 seconds. Sometimes you may spend 10 minutes and you will still not be able to pick the pattern. Broadly a function of how many questions have you seen in your life. Not a lot to be understood or read in series and codes. There is a certain approach that you have to follow. I would rate it still, if you have practiced many questions on series and codes, it is still on the easier side. Right? Distribution and arrangements, you can mark them as slightly difficult. The kind of questions that they asked you in CSAT are easy, but these topics inherently can be difficult. Then you have cubes. Now cubes, for those people who can abstractize, who can imagine in their heads, could be easy. For some people who just cannot project certain three-dimensional figures, cannot think of paints and possibilities, for some people it could be hard. But there are certain questions in cubes which are rather easy, right? By and large, if you ask me, inequalities is on the easier side, blood relations on the easier side, syllogism is on the easier side, calendars, clocks is on the easier side, series and codes, it's a so-so wala game, right? It can work for some people, it may not work for some people, and then dice is the easiest of them all. 2 to 3 topics only amongst these set of topics which are relatively harder. Right? That means there are every chance that if you get a question, if you get a total of 15 to 18 odd questions, 10 to 12 are very, very doable. You may find every year 3 to 4 questions which you find are on the moderate side or on the difficult side of things. That means between QA and LR, you should pick on LR first. It does not take a lot of investment. There's a total of 11 odd topics. If you spend 1 day or maybe 2 days understanding the basics of every topic, right, there onwards you have to only practice. 4 questions a day, 5 questions a day in a certain organized manner is going to see you through. Maybe a month's time, 2 months' time, you will be more than well prepared for CSAT reasoning. It's not a challenge. For instance, if you pick on cubes, the kind of questions that they will ask you on cubes, let me have it there, not here. Cubes, where the kind of questions that they may ask you would be, they may ask you cubes which are painted and then cut. They may ask you to stack a few cubes or to stack a few cuboids to make a bigger cube. That may be the kind of question that they may ask you, right? Broadly speaking, the most kind of questions would be these. You take a solid cube, you paint it in a singular color, you paint it in a combination of colors, then this solid cube is cut into several smaller cuboids. They may be identical, they may not be identical, then you are expected to find certain cuboids with X number of sides painted or with specific colors. You may have certain smaller cubes and cuboids. You will be expected to build a bigger cube or a cuboid by stacking them up. You will have to tell them how many such cubes or cuboids will you require. What will be the dimension of the bigger cube or cuboid? Broadly speaking, the most common question would be this one. Now this requires some sense of an imagination, some sense. Not a lot, but some sense, right? Some of those people may find this a little harder, but if you practice it enough, probably about 2 days, 3 days time, you will be good to go. In the other section, which is on dices, dices is the easiest. Normally takes you about 5 to 10 seconds to do any questions on dices. There will be 2 types of questions. One type of question will be closed dices. Other would be open dices. In closed dices, only 2 rules to remember. In open dices, there is only 1 rule to remember. If you remember these 3 rules, any questions on dices, you can solve in a matter of seconds. Not in a matter of minutes, genuinely seconds. Then you have questions on calendars. Calendars is only and only about a singular concept, which is one that of odd days. If you understand what odd days are, there will be no question on calendars which does not involve that concept. It's literally about just a singular concept, one that of odd days. Now, they may introduce or they may marry a question on logical reasoning with quantitative aptitude. That is something that they can do. Which is say sometimes in CAT they would say DI based LR or LR based DI. Which is to say questions on DI but broadly logical reasoning based. Questions on LR but broadly data based. Now you don't have a lot of questions on DI in CSAT. In CSAT you may say quant based LR or LR based quant. Which is say, it is actually a question of quant, but for you to eventually reach what concept has to be applied, you have to have a sense of reasoning. There is a question which is actually of LR, but for you to figure out this specific question, you need to know some basics on quants. For example, last year they asked a question on the number of days. They said today is Sunday. Find out what day will it be exactly on the 10 raised power 10th day. There is only one concept in calendars, which is that of odd days. If you know between today and 10 raised power 10 days, how many odd days will there be, you just add that number. Simple. But for you to solve it, you need to know 10 raised power 10 divided by 7. Now 10 raised power 10 divided by 7 is a quant concept. It's a concept of remainder theorems. For you to apply the concept of LR, you have to breach this layer, which is one that of quant. Right? So some expectations are absolutely necessary. Quants and LR typically go hand in hand. If you are good with quants, right, you will most likely be okay, if not the best at logical reasoning. If you are good at logical reasoning, you will definitely be good at quantitative aptitude. Right? Calendars specifically about a singular topic, singular concept, which is the one that of odd days. Follow this up with, let's say, a syllogism. Syllogism is only and only about a specific way of drawing Venn diagrams, not considering possibilities. There are ways of doing syllogism-based questions. If you only get a hang of how to draw a Venn diagram without considering possibilities, you will be able to do all questions on syllogism without a doubt. Very, very doable. You have questions based on arrangements. Now, arrangements, you need to know that there will be circular arrangements, linear arrangements, quadrilateral arrangements, or polygon. The easiest are circular arrangements. If you know a few rules as to how to start, if you do a few due diligence, which is say, write all the rules down in a singular place so that you don't have to flip pages time and again, use shorthand, know where to start from. If you get those basics right, circular arrangements are the easiest questions to do. Now, they may add one or two layers to a question on circular arrangement, which will make it only lengthy, not make it harder. Right? If you get the basics on circular arrangement right, you will get linear, you will get quadrilateral, you will get polygon. Right? It is not going to be a problem for you. But they can make arrangements difficult too, which is when they turn arrangements into distribution. Right? Which is say not along a specific shape, but across grids. So far, UPSC has not asked those questions. In fact, they have asked only a few questions on arrangements, which is also broadly circular arrangements, and that too very, very doable questions, really doable questions, right? You have other topics, for example, blood relations. You have topics such as inequalities. They may marry a blood relations and inequality question with an arrangement-based question. If you are good with arrangements, you will be very, very good with layered questions on blood relations and also on inequalities. There are only a few basics in inequalities that you need to know. Some associative properties. If A is greater than B, B is greater than C, then A will be greater than C. If A is greater than B, B is less than C, then between A and C, you cannot tell what is the relationship. Only two things you need to know, right? Basics in inequalities, you'll be able to do all questions on inequalities. When they start to layer these questions with arrangements, which will say inequalities will not be simply, they will not write down for you a certain inequality. They may express this in word format. If you are able to read that word format, if you are able to put that in an inequality form, right, chances are that they may have layered it in an arrangement-based question. If you are good with arrangements, you'll be very, very good with inequalities also. Like I said, uske baad bachta hai hamare paas series and codes. Honestly, series and codes, there is nothing nobody can teach you in series and codes. There are people who may claim that they teach you, but there is nothing they can teach you. They can only tell you a certain approach, right, as to how to go about these questions. It really depends upon how many series and codes questions have you seen in your life that you will be able to find a pattern. Sometimes you will find a pattern in 10 seconds. Sometimes you may take a minute or two. You'll be able to find this pattern. Usually the thumb rule is, if you do not find a pattern in 15-20 seconds, just skip it. Move to the next question. Come back with a fresh mind, probably towards the end of the exam. Maybe then you will be able to find that pattern. That can happen. These are very, very doable sections, LR-based sections, really, really doable sections. Some or the other sections you may find a little hard. Now, what should be your approach? Your approach should be, for each of these sections, you would focus on the foundation first. Read up these foundation principles. Right? If you are enrolled in any classroom format, build your foundation first. Do not worry about speed in the beginning. Only and only build your foundation first. If you are enrolled in any classes or if you are doing it on your own, try to solve simple questions first. Move to moderate questions. After you are very, very confident in simple questions, difficult is absolutely unnecessary. But if you have time at your hand, you should practice a few difficult questions too. Now, there is a way you have to go about them. Right? How do you go about them? You will first pick on a certain topic, find out the kind of questions that they ask you in that specific topic. For each of those questions, there will be a specific approach. Now, based on that specific approach, there will be questions which are direct, there will be questions which are a little too layered. The direct questions are the ones which will be rather simple. What you do is, first look at a few solved examples. See how these examples have been solved. Build those concepts in your head, try to apply these concepts to these simple questions. Once you have started to get these questions right, that should build you some confidence. Do not worry about getting a question wrong. In fact, if you want to get a question wrong, you should be getting the question wrong initially. शुरू में कर लो, अभी गलत हो जाए चल जाएगा. Right? If you do it a little later, that is when it's going to hurt your cause. You should never be worried about getting a question wrong. If you get a question wrong, no problem. Look at its explanation. If you manage to understand the explanation and find out where you went wrong, right? What was it when you were thinking about this question? Where did you go wrong? If you can get those two things right, you are good to go. Once you have solved a set of these questions, come back to these questions not the next day. Maybe skip a day in the middle, right? Come back to the same number of questions after a day or two. Try to solve the same questions again, right? Without taking any reference. If you now manage to get these questions right, that is when you should be sure that simple questions I will get right, not a problem, right? Now depends upon how much time do you really have. You may want to practice more and more of these simple questions. If you do not have a lot of time, then you move to certain moderate questions. Moderate questions would be same concepts, sometimes a combination of two concepts. Sometimes the same concept, but not one layer, multiple layers of questions. There can be, you will look at a question, you will be able to tell which one is a harder question and which one is a simpler question. Move to moderate questions, right? The number of simple questions you have done, at least half of those you should do for moderate level, right? Chances are in moderate level questions, you will be getting a lot more questions wrong compared to the simple questions. This is the one stage where people completely exclude themselves from practicing. They start to believe कि उनको नहीं आता, उनसे नहीं हो पाएगा. This is exactly what you have to avoid. Right? You should not worry about getting a question wrong. You have to understand there is only a few permutations possible. For each topic, कितने permutation होंगे for them to form a question. The more number of questions you have seen and gotten wrong, then figured out why you got that question wrong, did it again, right? Then did it multiple times so that it became muscle memory. Right? Your chances are 90% of the times from the number of questions you have prepared, they're going to ask you a question. There's not a lot of combinations, there's not a lot of permutations possible. So the number of repetitions really is going to build your confidence. You go from simple to moderate. If you have attempted, let's say 100 simple questions, at least 50 you should do on moderate. If you now feel a little more confident, right, go for difficult ones. But whenever you're moving from a simple to a moderate level and moderate to a difficult level, you should tell yourself that there is a higher chance I may get these questions wrong. That should not be linked to your confidence. Usko confidence के साथ तुरंत associate नहीं कर देना. Right? You may get these questions wrong. जब तक, so long as you can understand the explanation, that means you understand the concept. You may not understand the approach, but you understand the concept. Once you have understood how to do a certain question, then find a similar question, do it. Right? Then find another similar question, do it. One would be the correct approach. Then it would be a repetition. This repetition is the one thing which is basically called practice. The more you repeat, the better you get at the same type of questions. Right? Now, depending upon how many questions you have seen, how many permutations you have seen, and how many have you repeated, you will be acing either the simple ones, the moderate ones, and the difficult questions. Right? This is not really required for CSAT. In fact, if you ask me, moderate भी बहुत ज़्यादा required नहीं होता है. If you understand the foundational concepts, right, UPSC will be taken care of. But I would request you, because there's a lot of time from now, you should definitely go for moderate level questions too, right? Now, like I said, between these three sections, right, one thing you have to remember as a matter of principle, it would be, there will be topics which you think are easy. There will be topics which you particularly do not like, but you find them moderate, which is to say, for example, the most common such topic would be time gain and time loss in clocks. Clocks ke all other questions are rather easy, but if you find time gain, time loss questions, that is the one concept which pretty much most kids don't like, right? But if you understand time gain, time loss, right, it is not a very difficult concept, right? That means with practice, if I can solve a certain question, right, not naturally, but if I understand the concept and if I then apply myself, those will be your moderate level of difficulty topics. Then there will be topics which are inherently difficult for you. For example, those people who have zero ability to abstractize, right, who can't think of a cube, who can't think of colors, right, who can't draw them. There are people with those inherent disabilities too. There are people who are just complete, I would not want to use the word, it's an open session, and those people who are, let's say, not very confident with probability, or a PNC for that matter, permutations, combinations. Right? There are people who have some topics which they know for a fact that they are really hard topics for them to understand. Three types of topics broadly: easy, moderate, and difficult. As a matter of principle, you should ace this, which is say for topics which you find easy, in these topics, you should definitely go for moderate level of difficulty questions. For those topics which you find moderate, here you should once again go for moderate level of difficulty questions. For those topics which you find difficult, you should at least go for the simple questions of these topics. So that if you get a simple question on probability, right, you should be able to tell that this is a simpler question. If you find a difficult question on probability, that already was a topic that you are not very confident on, right? You should skip it. But you should know which question to attend and which question to skip. And that is only and only going to come to you with more and more practice. Unless you practice, quants and LR you should just forget. Right? You have to practice so much more. The matter of principle I've told you. Right? How do you practice this? For each topic, first find, if you can find a book for yourself, for each topic find the subtopics. Right? Associated with these subtopics, find there, read that subtopic, get that concept, try to see a solved example. Right? Once you have seen the solved example and understood it, apply that concept to a similar question. Apply this concept to another similar question. Do 4 to 5 such questions. If you've managed to get them right, that means you get that concept. Once you get that concept, right, in the same day, don't attempt 100 of those. Right? What do you want to do? You want to skip a day in the middle, come back the next day without looking at the book, pick similar questions, right? Try to attempt them. If you get some questions wrong, don't worry. Right? Go back, check the explanations. So long as you can understand the explanation, then go back and repeat it. Right? Try to see if you have gotten the concept right or not. Find a similar question, try to repeat it. If you can now apply and solve it, good for you, not a problem. Right? First do simple questions, try to repeat as many, then move to a level of difficulty moderate. Right? Moment you move to moderate, right? If you have done 100 simple questions, at least do 50 moderate questions. Chalo 50 nahi karo, at least do 30 odd. Right? Try to put yourself in a difficult situation. In moderate level of difficulty questions, you should expect to get a few more questions wrong. Don't worry about them. Look at their explanations, try to understand the explanations. If you get the concept right, then find a similar question, apply the same concept to that question, get it right. The more you repeat, it will become muscle memory. Right? Then you will understand for yourself, there is a topic of clocks, there are so many types of questions in clocks, these are easy, these are moderate, these are difficult. That helps you identify in the real exam, which questions are easy, which questions are difficult, which ones should I attempt in the beginning, which ones should I not. For example, all of those of my students who have seen an arrangement-based question, they would know that arrangements can be hard, they can be difficult, they can be easy, they can be moderate. But arrangements definitely are lengthy. They will take some time. Right? So if there is an arrangement, if there is a passage granted, it should be accompanied by 2 to 3 questions before you are interested in it. It may be a question which is doable, but if you know it's going to take you 4 to 5 minutes of time, and if it is not associated with 2 to 3 more questions, then what is the point for you to waste 5 minutes? Unless you have 5 minutes extra, then you attempt them. Otherwise, keep it for the last. Right? This is something you will only and only understand through more and more practice. The more practice you do, the better you will get at identifying these questions and then navigating the exam correctly. Right? Matter of principles I've told you. If you ask me, if you manage to do any of this, I am telling you will be an overkill for CSAT. Which is say you will be possibly ready for a better exam in terms of aptitude, which could be an SPIPO. Right? You will be ready for that too. Right? If you are an overkill for CSAT, good for you only. Right? Chances are that you may want to attempt other exams too. Right? It is only going to help you. This is a skill that you should always pick. Now, in terms of the last thing, which is that of books, right? What books should be recommended, what books should not be recommended. Once again, there are two types of aspirants. Those who want to spend some money, those who don't, right? For those people who want to not spend any money, you don't have to worry at all, right? What you will not find is a book. What you will definitely find is question banks. In fact, if you ask any person who is good with aptitude, they will tell you it really does not matter what the concept is. You don't have to read the concept time and again. The book does not matter. What really matters is practice. What you really need more than a book is a question bank, right? If you type, let's say, if you type blood relations, right? Your Google search query should be blood relations, IBPS, LR questions, solved, file type, PDF. Blood relations, LR, logical reasoning, solved questions, IBPS, file type, PDF. You will find some 200 PDFs on blood relations itself. Right? Some of them may have only questions, some of them will have questions and their answers, some of them will have questions and their solutions also. You should go for one which has solutions, not just answers. Right? If you don't want to spend no money, you will easily find question banks for sure. If not file type PDF, if you don't find their PDFs, you will find multiple websites, right, where you have SSE questions, banking questions, CAT questions, CSAT questions from previous years, and even for matter of practice. If you don't want to spend any money, you will not, most likely not get any book on it. Right? Book aapko nahi milegi, but question banks you can easily find. If you want to spend some money, if you want to buy a book, depends upon who you really are. If you ask me, logical reasoning, R.S. Agarwal is a decent book. Right? Modern approach to logical reasoning. There is another book, verbal and non-verbal reasoning. Depending upon how much ever money you want to spend, it's a decent book to pick. In fact, not just R.S. Agarwal, you can go pick up any book from, let's say, an Arihant publication for that matter, Tata McGraw-Hill for that matter. Ask them for a logical reasoning book for banking, right? Go find these logical reasoning books. In fact, you can spend some minutes at the bookshop itself, try to see which book you really like from the outside. Some books could be bulky, some books are not bulky. Depending upon whichever suits your preference, you pick one. This is a decent book, you can start with this. But remember, you don't have to waste a lot of time building concepts here. Itne zyada concepts hai nahi logical reasoning. It's about a matter of thinking, which is going to come to you through more and more practice. Throw yourself into question banks. Throw yourself multiple types of questions. Try to solve them, right? Try to get them wrong also. In fact, try to get them right. You will get them wrong. If you get them wrong, don't worry, right? Look at the explanation. So long as you can understand the explanation, then redo it. Not the same day. Skip a day in the middle, right? Come back and do that question again. So that do you remember the concept or not? Right? Repeat, repeat, repeat. You will automatically build this as muscle memory. This will be really your muscle memory. Now, one thing what a lot of aspirants also do, which is a common thing you should avoid, is something, some people do this for general studies also. Something you have to really avoid is that I am going to attempt PYQs and that is my practice. Logical reasoning, PYQs is not your practice. Logical reasoning, PYQs should you look at? Absolutely, to get a hang of what kind of questions they ask you. But logical reasoning, PYQs would mean what? It would mean probably about, let's say, 2011 to 2024. 11, 12 to 24. This is roughly around 12 odd years. Every year they would have asked you, like, say, on an average 15 questions. This is a total of 180 questions from about 11 topics. So you can imagine this is roughly around 10 to 15 odd questions per topic. That is not practice. Right? Previous year's question papers are only a benchmark for you for the kind of questions they are asking you. What is the kind of questions? What is the level of difficulty of these questions? Only as a marker of that. You may want to solve them also, just to check whether you're good at it or not, but this is not practice. Practice would be you find one topic, you read the central concepts of those topics, associated subsections, try to look at the solved examples, then do those solved examples. Then when you are sure, then you attempt previous year's question papers also. Don't mistake this for your practice. Right? That is not practice at all. If you ask me for reading comprehension when the only practice is PYQs. Because reading comprehension for CSAT is unlike any other reading comprehension. You may pick on a Barron's or a Kaplan's, you may pick on any GMAT book. That is not going to help you. Reading comprehensions for CSAT only and only PYQs, which is say from let's say 12 years time. There were some years where they asked you 40 passages. Now they on an average ask you somewhere around 27 on passages. Let's say on an average 30 questions. Right? This is a total of 360 passages odd. Right? 360 passages is more than sufficient practice for reading comprehension, but previous year's questions for logical reasoning is not decent practice. Right? This was all for your session. If you have any questions, any queries, feel free to ask me. Anything you want to know. Louder, please. If you ask me, quant first, then LR. Quant first, then LR. Right? Because you should have some confidence on basic arithmetic. Sometimes if you know probability, permutation, combination, that helps you better. Right? I would request you to start with a QA first and then maybe an LRDI. You want to know what numbers are, na? First. You want to know some basic arithmetic operators. You want to be good with PNC, with probability. That will build your confidence. Then you can move to an LR based. But it really does not hurt. Even if you start with an LR first, it's not like, oh, you're going to hurt yourself. No, that's not a problem.
So like in GS paper, we need to practice before prelims like 10,000 questions. There
is no like such ground rule that you have to do 10,000 questions.
Commonly, sir, everyone advise, sir. But sir, in CSAT, how much we need to prepare, sir? How much question we need to solve?
See, honestly, there is no such golden number if you ask me. But like I said, if there is, in logical reasoning, let's say if there are 12 odd such topics, for each topic, try to do between 50 to 100 at least. Between 50 to 100 would mean if you start from today, if you do 5 questions a day, you will be doing more than 100 questions per topic. Right? It is easily doable. Right? What you should avoid doing is push it for later. That is something you should avoid doing. Right? Especially if you are some person who has had no background. This is not something that you can manage to do in a matter of 2 months. That's not going to happen. Right? It is something for a person with humanities background, for a person who has had zero background, let's say with maths, they should start early on. If they start early, then you can easily make do by doing 5 questions a day. Right? If you started later, then it means some around 15 to 20 questions every day around the same time when you're revising GS2. So it is even more undoable then. Right? If you start early, 5 questions a day would typically mean only and only solving question would mean at best it will mean 15-20 minutes, and then analyzing the explanation, everything, at best 30-35 odd minutes. Right? Reading a topic and then doing 5 to 6 questions or 10 questions a day would mean probably about 1 hour, 1 to 15 minutes, 1 hour, 15 minutes, that's it. Which I think is a time anybody can afford. 30 minutes to 1 hour, 20 minutes is not something that most people can't afford. You easily can. Right? Start early though, that would be my recommendation. If you're some person who has previously taken CAT and is already good with it, I would not tell you to start right now. But if you're somebody who knows for a fact that you probably may need some more help, then start early. Yeah, आ जाएगा. Time management. नहीं आती है, मैं क्या, वो तो मतलब रियल है, यू आर ऑल ह्यूमन बीइंग्स आफ्टर ऑल. What I normally feel is, and this is not something that's unpopular as an opinion, but if you look at it, most of the stuff that you would read every day would be a lot of drab. Right? There's a lot of text that you read, a lot of text that you want to remember. This would be a refreshment every day. If you solve 5 questions every day, this is basically a break from the routine. Right? Time management का मतलब क्या? Can you not spare 30 minutes every day? 30 minutes you can easily do. Right? In fact, ये करके आंखें खुल जाती है, नींद नहीं आती. Right? Most likely ये करोगे, गलत ही होगा. गलत होगा तो तुम्हें डर लगेगा, आंखें खुल जाएंगी, सोना नहीं आएगा. देखो वो, that is a matter of one's discipline. मतलब I'm not a self-help guru honestly, but if you ask me, that discipline you'll have to build. नींद बहुत आती है तो क्या कर सकते हैं उसका, मतलब बाहर जाओ, भागो वागो मेरे हिसाब से. It's also what I feel is most people, because most of you live in like one of these closed rooms जहाँ साथ daylight नहीं आती, हवा नहीं आती. थोड़ी fresh air भी ले लेनी चाहिए, थोड़ा like build some good habits like I say. सुबह उठो, थोड़ा व्यायाम करो, blood circulation improve करो अपनी, वॉक अराउंड, राइट, अपने घुटनों को भी थोड़ा रेस्ट दिया करो, बैठे मत रहा करो, उठो, थोड़ा गाने वाने सुनो, राइट. यू हैव टू फाइंड डिस्ट्रैक्शंस फॉर योरसेल्फ ना. The idea is not to stay motivated, the idea is to stay disciplined. It's not a question of motivation, it's a question of discipline, and discipline is boring. It is boring. How is it exciting for any person? Discipline can't be interesting, it is boring. Only those who see through this boredom eventually clear this exam na. मोटिवेशन प्रॉब्लम होगी तभी तो नींद आ रही है. That's why you're getting, that is why you're probably sleeping. Otherwise, this dream should keep you awake. It depends on the strength of your conviction. How badly do you want to be this officer? Right? That you will be up. Why would you not be up? There is your competition. There's so many people out in the market who are out to get you. That should keep you up.
सर जैसे सी सेट इसी महीने से कर सकते हैं या 1-2 महीने बाद कर सकते हैं?
सी सेट 1-2 महीने बाद, मैं वही बोल रहा हूँ ना, ये डिपेंड करता है तुम्हारी बैकग्राउंड पे. अगर आप लेट्स से आप इंजीनियर हो, क्या आपने मैथ्स कर रखा है क्या? आप
12th तक किया है.
12th तक किया, उसके बाद कभी मैथ्स छुआ वापस?
यस.
कॉन्फिडेंट हो मैथ्स में, ज़्यादा दिक्कत नहीं होती, तो 2 महीने बाद भी कर सकते हो, तो कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं. इफ़ यू आस्क मी जेन्युइनली, इफ़ यू हैव इनफ टाइम, अगर आप इनफ टाइम दे सकते हो सी सेट को, तो इट्स अ मैटर ऑफ 2 months, right? Genuinely 2 months. But for those people who have had almost no background या जिनको डर लगता है मैथ से, उनके लिए 2 months is basically scary, right? So what they should do is they should start way early. They should start probably about 6 months prior, so that in these 2 months you build up those central concepts, and in the next 4 months you try to practice so many questions, so that you will build more confidence. For those who are already confident, जिनको इतना डर नहीं लगता मैथ से, तो उनको concepts gain करने में 15-20 दिन लगते हैं. बाकी अप्लाई करना है 1 महीने में हो जाता है वो, नॉट अ प्रॉब्लम. लेट भी कर सकते हो. देखो जैसे क्वांट्स में देयर विल बी सर्टेन टॉपिक्स व्हिच आर कॉमनली फ्रीक्वेंटली आस्क्ड मोर. जैसे नंबर सिस्टम्स इज वन, फ्रीक्वेंटली आस्क्ड. Time, speed and distance, frequently asked. Time and work, frequently asked. Ratios, proportions, allocations, frequently asked. What is not frequent? Some questions on probability, permutation, combination, they may ask you, you know, far, few and between वाली बात होती है. They will not ask you a lot of those questions, right? Geometry, they don't really ask you a lot of those questions. So some topics which you know have had a history of a lot of questions being asked, that is trends. So you follow those trends, no? Right? You will prepare according to what you know. Right? They may throw a complete curveball at you, that's a different story. But you can only prepare about things that you know about this exam. If you know they have been asking you so many questions, so it will be foolish on your part to not prepare these topics and prepare other topics. Right? जो historically जिनकी weightage ज़्यादा रही है, तो आप उसको obviously ज़्यादा weightage दोगे. Right? But normally, like I said, a matter of principle would be some topics that you're not very fond of, at least उनके easy questions you should be able to do. Right? Moderate hard ना कर पाओ, at least उसका easy question you should be able to spot and tell कि हाँ ये मैं कर सकता हूँ. Right? That's it's called a low hanging fruit. Most people would do it. Why should you not be able to do it? Anybody else? नहीं PNC के लिए 11th 12th नहीं देखो कॉम्पिटिटिव एग्जाम का PNC इज डिफरेंट फ्रॉम 12th 11th का PNC यार वो स्लाइटली लॉन्गर क्वेश्चंस any CAT preparation for PNC any in fact the kind of questions they will ask you on PNC and probability in CSAT would be far more basic compared to a CAT so basics of PNC basics of probability easily through ये बेस थ्योरम थोड़े पूछेंगे तुमसे मतलब probability में वैसी चीजें नहीं पूछेंगे they are going to ask you questions which can be solved in 2 minutes time ना basics
रीजनिंग में जैसे कि एसबीआई पीओ में क्वेश्चन आते हैं उसमें टाइम से भी क्वेश्चन रहते हैं ठीक है और फिर ब्लड रिलेशन सबको मिक्स करके क्वेश्चन देते हैं बट सीसैट में ऐसा कुछ नहीं है तो क्या सिंपल वाले क्वेश्चन करने हैं या
ऑफ कोर्स करने देखो सिंपल तो आप करोगे ही ना यू विल स्टार्ट फ्रॉम सिंपल क्वेश्चंस एंड इवेंचुअली मूव टू अ डिफिकल्ट क्वेश्चन ना राइट लाइक आई सेड देयर विल बी क्वांट्स बेस्ड डीआई क्वेश्चंस क्वांट्स बेस्ड एलआर क्वेश्चंस एलआर बेस्ड क्वांट क्वेश्चंस टू राइट वो तो आपने व्हाई वुड यू वांट टू प्रिपेयर फॉर समथिंग व्हिच इज ओनली इजी you would want to prepare yourself for something which is more difficult na if you prepare yourself for stuff which is moderate to difficult then easily you will be able to do those basic questions right जब prepare ही easy के लिए करोगे if they throw a moderate question at you how are you going to handle that right preparation के time तो at least moderate level तो कर लो quantitative aptitude I can give you a few topics for sure from my memory quant ke topics would be broadly there will be number systems number system a big one you have percentages you have ratios and proportions you have time speed and distance you have time and work, you have probability, permutations, combinations, then you have geometry. These are the basics that you need to be absolutely sure of. Geometry, they don't ask you in CSAT so much. I don't think I've ever seen a geometry-based question. Maybe there is. I haven't seen a lot of questions on quants, but geometry nahi hi puchte. Probability PNC basic questions they will ask you, but number systems is pretty heavy, percentages is pretty heavy, ratios, proportions, time, speed and distance, time and work, this is something you should be absolutely good at. Right. इसके अलावा और कोई टॉपिक्स रहते क्वांट में? LCM HCF क्या? LCM HCF तो नंबर सिस्टम का ही पार्ट बन जाएगा. नंबर सिस्टम इज अ ह्यूज टॉपिक इन इटसेल्फ. उसके अंदर बहुत सारी चीजें हैं, इंक्लूडिंग रिमाइंडर थ्योरम, फैक्टराइजेशन, सब कुछ आएगा इसके अंदर. No, what you should do is first you should look at previous year's question papers and see which of these areas carries the most weightage. Right? Those areas you know for a fact you should be expecting more questions on those lines. They may change that trend tomorrow, but at least what you know is so they have been asking you so many questions on number systems. That means you can't leave out number systems for sure. Number systems you pick on a certain book, read the basic concepts, find solved examples, then find similar questions of those solved examples. Right? If you have a book which is not a question bank, then try to solve the exercises given in the book. Then move to a question bank also, right? Normally what you should do is, any table of content is going to give you the broader topic and then subtopics. That subtopic should tell you how many subtopics are there in number system, how many do you have to prepare, so that when you are looking up those questions, you type the name of the subtopic, plus find practice questions, banking, file type, PDF, you automatically get it. Mixtures and allegations दिखा नहीं मैंने. Mixtures and allegations also. Usually in CAT, geometry is a big one, PNC probability is a big one, number system is a big one. Profit and loss, yes. These are quants case certain topics. The one I could recollect from my memory are because they have been asked the most, right? Anybody else? It's the right answer, yeah. I think, have you attended classes? No, when I do reading comprehension, I tell them there is only one way of looking at those questions, which is you look at every option, you think of reasons as to why that option should be wrong. Your approach should not be, ki, oh, which of these is right. Your approach should be exactly the opposite. Right? What reasons do I have for each statement to be wrong? Right? Find out the nuances, find out problems with each statement. For those statements where you have the least number of problems, that will in 9 out of 10 times be the right answer. That's how you have to go about it. But for you to understand problems with each statement, you will have to have the ability to read and understand the substance. Now, if you look at the passages that they've been asking you, most passages will be from climate, environment, sustainability. Those are easy passages. The harder passages would be one where they ask you economics, economic theory, or where they ask you political philosophy. Those topics are normally harder. If you have done polity well enough, or if you're, let's say, a student of political science, you will look at those statements and you will understand what the underlying message was. For example, there was this one question that they asked you. It was a question on fiscal policy and monetary policy without them mentioning what the fiscal policy and monetary policy is. In these statements, they asked you, does this mean that fiscal policy and monetary policy go hand in hand? It did not mention in the passage anything about fiscal and monetary policy at all. That means you are expected to know what a fiscal policy is, what a monetary policy is, to be able to mark those options right. So if the better you are at general studies, it is always going to help you make sense of the passage. The better you are with general studies, that's always going to help you pick out problems with these options mentioned. Right? And then, like I said, for those options where you have the least number of reasons to believe that this is wrong, that is usually the right answer. Question kuch bhi ho. Question could be corollary, question could be inference, question could be which of these assumptions are valid, whichever is the question, right? The approach is the same. Normally that is, without a passage, I can't really tell you. What you can do possibly is, there is a YouTube video on reading comprehension itself. We have done previous year's question papers. You can go back and check, right, the kind of approach that I'm following. For every question, I follow the same approach, right? Because reading comprehension for CSAT, I dare say, is not really a lot of reading comprehension, because they expect you to know a lot about the substance too. It's not just about that passage, it's also about your understanding of economics, your understanding of polity, your understanding of history, your understanding of society sometimes. That also comes in handy. Right? It'll help you if you go back to that video and check it out. Right? Probably that will give you a hint as to how do you space out between multiple options which are very, very closely spaced. Anybody else? डेटा सफिशिएंसी की बात कर रहे हो तुम? ऐसा होना तो नहीं चाहिए ना. मैं मतलब देखो, किसी भी डेटा सफिशिएंसी क्वेश्चन में रिमेंबर फर्स्ट थिंग, डेटा सफिशिएंसी इज अ टाइप ऑफ क्वेश्चन, नॉट अ टॉपिक. डेटा सफिशिएंसी वुड मीन you first look at the question and then you check if statement 1 alone is enough for you to solve the question. Next thing you look for is statement 2 alone enough to solve that question? Let's say there are only 2 statements. If both of them individually are not able to solve the question, that means statement 1 alone is not sufficient, statement 2 alone is not sufficient. Those get eliminated. Then you have to check a combination of the two. If the combination of two is also not able to get you a singular unique answer to the question, that means neither of them are sufficient. Right? There is a certain approach you have to go through. You check statement 1, each of these statements standalone. If that statement alone is going to help you answer the question, when I say answer the question, it means you have to have one answer to that question. Right? If it is not possible, then check for a combination. If a combination works out for you, great. If it does not work out for you, then you know what the answer is, that neither is alone. But there's a way you go about it. But ideally speaking, if you know the central concept, वो ऐसा कुछ नहीं है कि तुम मार्क नहीं कर पाओगे. मार्क तो कर ही लोगे. Any other? Can we wrap up? Chalo, have a good day.